Welcome to Substance Free 02043, brought to you by Hingham Cares. I'm Kristen Arute, and I'm President and Program Director of Hingham Cares. We are a federally funded nonprofit, and our mission is to reduce substance use among youth in our community. Our guests today are Hunter and Cameron Flores of The Sober Truth. Welcome, Hunter and Cameron.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Great
We're excited to be here.
This episode will be part one of our discussion with Hunter and Cameron. Since you are, in fact, brothers, there's a lot of commonality with your stories. You're both persons in recovery, but your stories are also very divergent at the same time.
Correct.
You've had your own unique experiences with addiction and recovery, but before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better. So if you could tell us a little bit about where you grew up and share about your background and family dynamics, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Hunter, do you want to share?
Yeah, sure. I can start. I grew up in Lexington. I grew up playing sports. I had an amazing upbringing. My mother did a phenomenal job. I didn't have my biological father in my life from a very young age. It was about he stepped away when I was about 4, and luckily I had a stepfather come into my life who I had an amazing relationship with. I grew up focused on athletics. I was very grateful to grow up in a town like Lexington, surrounded by an amazing community, a lot of amazing people there.
I'm the older brother. I'm 33. We moved to Lexington at a young age. 2 boys raised by a single mother. My father stepped out of our lives when we were pretty young. My mom was a very hardworking individual. She had a full-time job, was raising 2 boys, as well as going to college at the same time to get her degree in nursing. And she was a really strong woman, and she did her absolute best to raise us.
Were you involved in sports or other activities?
So I personally wasn't involved in sports. When I was growing up, my mom got me into like t-ball, baseball, things like that. But it was never like a big passion of mine growing up. I was a really good student as well. When I was younger, I was diagnosed with dyslexia and attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactive disorder as a child. And I was prescribed certain medications to help me get through school. And I did really well with the assistance of those medications, and then, kind of veered off when I decided to do some experimenting and self-help, I would call it, with drugs and alcohol.
So you're the older of the 2,
Correct.
as you just described.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you started using substances? You described it as being sort of an exploration of self-help.
Correct. When I was younger, I always felt different from other people, even though there was never anything like adamantly wrong with me, but I always felt much different from others. I just didn't feel like I fit in, had a lot of self-image issues as well, growing up without a father figure in my life, really, and just having my mom and seeing families that have, moms and dads and, family like that. So I always felt different. And one day, me and a friend of mine that I was growing up with had an idea to sneak into his sister's room, who was home from college, and tried drinking some alcohol for the first time. And when I did that, all those problems that I explained to you of like self-image or feeling different, they all slowly started slipping away when I was doing that. So that was the first exposure I ever had to drugs and alcohol, was at 13 years old.
So it was almost like an accidental therapeutic.
Correct. It was something that helped me that I didn't know that I needed. I mean, looking back now, I wish I was a little bit more transparent with the school, my mom, other adults in my life, where maybe they could have helped direct me to the correct people to give me the help that I needed. But instead, I discovered drugs and alcohol, which gave me a euphoric effect of feeling quote unquote normal.
So from that initial taste of alcohol, what happened after that? Did you start seeking it out on your own? Did you?
So it wasn't, the whole world didn't end. Nothing really terrible happened to me. I got very, very drunk. But during that whole process of drinking and trying, alcohol for the first time, I felt better with almost every single sip. And so after that first time, I really decided to seek it out more, because it was the only time in my life where I felt normal, I would say, or the voices of self-doubt or self-hate that I had towards myself kind of got drowned out with the alcohol.
But you were taking prescription meds at the same time?
I was also prescribed Adderall at this time as well, too,
Okay.
for my learning disabilities in school. And mixing the two gave me a euphoric effect that I wanted to continue doing and seeking out and finding. And of course, that ended up kind of segueing into trying marijuana, trying, kind of any other drug that got put in front of me, because in my head, as somebody that was a young, teenager, 13 years old, if this certain substance gave me this type of effect, maybe another substance, if I mix it with this, will give me a different kind. And we'll just keep mixing and matching until I find the perfect amount where I feel great the entire time.
And the timeline for this was from middle school through high school and beyond?
Yeah, so my 8th grade summer going into my freshman year of high school was when I really began to experiment for that summer. So my best friend at the time had a sister that was in college, and she was a lot older than us, and she would come home to visit, and she would have alcohol in her room or some marijuana in her room or opium in her room. And it kind of was just a progression of wanting to try these different substances where it, began with alcohol. Then it began with, why don't we try stealing some of her marijuana? We'll smoke that, we'll drink. And then how about we mix some opium in with the marijuana, and we'll do that. And by 13 years old, I was kind of off and running and kind of ready to put or try anything that was put in front of me.
That's so young.
Yeah, I agree with you, because nowadays I see a 13-year-old and I'm like, that's a baby.
It's a child.
Right.
That's a child,
Nobody in your life, your parents, the school, nobody had any idea that you were dabbling with this stuff?
Not in the beginning. I was really, really good at hiding it. I was really, really good at saying, me and my friends are having a sleepover, keeping a lot of people in the dark. At first, I was really, really good at hiding it, so there was no real repercussions in my life at the time. But as things progressed, of course, I started to get caught and things like that. So,
Hunter, could you share with us a little bit about your story? So you had an older brother who was using substances. Were you aware of this at the time? Were the two of you close, first of all?
Yeah, we were. I mean, I wouldn't say as close as we are now, but so he's 33, I'm 31, so he's 2 years older than me. It was probably 6th grade. He was in 8th grade. He had started using drugs and alcohol when he was in 8th grade, and I wasn't in 6th grade. And his use in 8th grade started to cause some problems and friction in my family. And so I started developing some resentment towards Cameron in like 6th and 7th grade, just because I knew what he was doing and I saw the problems that it was causing in our family. But as I got closer to 8th grade, there was just like this natural curiosity that came over me, and I stopped having as much resentment towards him. I started asking him some questions, some inquisitive questions, and he kind of picked up on these cues like, okay, he's getting to the point that I was at a couple years ago when I was going into 8th grade. And one night we were laying in bed, and this was probably a couple weeks into my 8th grade year. I was 13, and he just came out and said, we shared a bedroom growing up. We were laying in bed. He goes, what would you say if I told you I had weed on me right now? And I said, without hesitation, I was like, I'd want to see it. Show it to me. And so we jumped out of bed. He went under his bed, pulled out a shoebox, pulled out a bag of weed, showed it to me. I touched it, smelt it, looked at it. I was like, okay, this is weed. We jumped back in bed, went to sleep, and kind of went on about our business. And it was a couple weeks from that night where my curiosity got to a point where I approached Cameron finally, and I was like, hey, like I want to smoke weed. Like I want to try weed. It was, I believe, the day after him, his best friend at the time, and myself, I smoked weed with them for the first time. And some people will tell you, like, the very first time they use any drug, it doesn't have to be marijuana, like they fall in love with it that very first time. For me, that wasn't the experience I had. I was pretty indifferent about it the first time that I smoked weed. I was like, don't love it, don't hate it. It's just kind of meh. Didn't really understand what all the hype was about. And then it was probably about 2 months from that first time that I smoked weed the second time. And it was that second time that I had kind of that aha, like, wow, this is amazing. The euphoria is amazing. The anxiety, the self-image issues that I was dealing with because of the fact that I didn't have my biological father in my life. it felt like it alleviated all of those feelings and emotions. It just felt like it was everything that I was looking for. And then from that second time to the third time, it was probably about a month, maybe 5 weeks until I smoked that third time. And then each successive time that I smoked, the period of time in between got shorter and shorter until it was basically midway through my 8th grade year. I was 13 years old. I was smoking weed every single day.
Wow.
And that sort of just progressed through 8th grade. I didn't understand at that time. I mean, of course, I'm 13 years old. I didn't have the foresight to understand that in 2.5 years' time, the path that this would lead me down, I would be fully addicted, both physically, mentally, emotionally, to opiates, to Oxycontin. Right? I just didn't understand that. But that's really how it started. It's always a progression. You never go from I'm using no substances at all to the complete other end of the spectrum, which is, what would be considered harder, more illicit, more, heroin, cocaine, crack. It usually starts with marijuana and alcohol, and then it's a progression, right? And so eventually for me, the weed and alcohol was not a strong enough high. And then when I was presented with the opportunity to use Oxycontin, because I was already getting high on weed and drinking alcohol, I didn't understand the magnitude of the decision I was making to use Oxycontin. I always say getting high kind of becomes this singular thing where it becomes difficult to differentiate the difference between getting high on marijuana versus Oxycontin or heroin or cocaine.
You're just looking for something that's effective.
Yeah, it's just like I get high. It doesn't really matter what the drug is. And that's why I really talk about weed as a gateway drug, because that's exactly what myself and a lot of other people are talking about when they call it a gateway drug. I'm already getting high on weed. This other drug's presented to me. This other opportunity's presented to me to use this other drug. What's the big deal? It's all just getting high, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much controversy over the term gateway drug.
There is, yeah.
But it does appear as though a lot of young people start with alcohol and marijuana. There are certainly cases where kids are prescribed opiates and become addicted to those
Absolutely.
out of the starting gate, but the progression that you just described is much more common.
Absolutely.
I do think it's interesting, though, that you didn't start with alcohol. Your brother started with alcohol.
Yeah.
Marijuana became your drug of choice right out of the starting gate. And for you, was it a combination of alcohol and marijuana? Or did you guys kind of mix it up as time went on?
So for me, it was a strong combination of alcohol and marijuana from 13 to probably 17. That's mainly what I did. I mean, in those times, I experimented with ecstasy, cocaine, different drugs like that. But the bread and butter for me until about 17 years old was just alcohol and marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was weed for me primarily. I remember in 8th grade, I tried to drink beer and it was repulsive to me. So I didn't really start drinking alcohol with any type of consistency or regularity until probably like my sophomore year of high school. My freshman year, I would drink maybe, once a month, once every couple months. But from 8th grade up until the end of my freshman year, the start of my sophomore year, it was primarily marijuana.
And when would you say the opioids became the primary source of your usage?
So for me, I mean, even when I was just drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana, I knew that I didn't do it the same way as my friends did. I'm more than willing to drink alone. I'm more than willing to smoke alone. I'm more than willing to do it any day of the week, 8 in the morning, 4 a.m. It didn't matter what time it was. As long as I could put something in my body to make me feel better about myself, I would do it.
And this is at a very young age.
At a very young age, even at 13, 14 years old, I knew I was different than other kids. I'm day drinking and taking shots of vodka in high school right before my 8 a.m. classroom,
Wow.
or before class starts, I'm sneaking off, smoking some weed to go back to class, or I'm leaving at lunch, so I'm doing these things already so much different than other people, but I wasn't educated enough around it to see these red flags and understand the direction that I was going in. I just thought, I like to have fun. I'm just having fun. That's all this is. Nobody's getting really hurt. And then at 17 years old, like my brother was saying, when certain things are put in front of you when you're already using or doing different substances, it's not that big of a deal. I remember I was at a house party one night and I saw somebody that was going to the bathroom a little bit too frequently and asked them what they were doing and said I was doing Oxycontin. I had no idea really what it was. I had no formal education around it. So it was kind of this big question mark to me. And he said, "You want to try some?" And I said, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." And when I did that first line of Oxycontin, it was almost like a neon sign went off in my head that said, "Do this drug as much as possible, 24/7. Put it in your body as much as you possibly can." Because
And how old were you at this point?
I was 17 years old.
Okay.
And all those feelings that I was trying to push down or get rid of with other illicit substances, they almost all disappeared when I did Oxycontin for the first time. My anxiety, my self-image issues, my racing thoughts, feeling less than other people, all of these feelings and emotions just completely evaporated from my body. And I was so blown away that this did that. So I was even more intrigued by it, and that basically created the snowball effect of just trying to seek it out as much as possible.
How did you fund your habit?
So unfortunately, when you're 17 years old and you're in high school, you don't really have a career path. There's no real job that you can get that's providing you with a lot of funds and a lot of money. So pretty quickly, I resorted to a life of crime to be able to support my drug habit, which ranged from, selling drugs, middlemaning drugs, or, a lot of theft, breaking and enterings, things like that to support my drug habit. And it's pretty unfortunate, but every crime I've ever committed in my life revolves around drugs and alcohol. Yeah. There hasn't been a single time where I did anything or was arrested or had a run-in with law enforcement that, didn't have something to do with drugs or alcohol growing up.
Rarely are you going to find someone committing the types of crimes that Cameron and I were without having some type of issue with drugs and alcohol, right? Rarely do you find someone that feels this need and this urge to go steal and commit crimes just because, right? Usually there is a driver behind those behaviors related to drugs and alcohol.
So you've both had brushes with the law that you just described, but you've also both been to rehab. Mm-hmm. Could you share those experiences? How often, how effective they were, that sort of thing?
Well, for me, at a really young age, once I wasn't able to hide my alcohol use or my marijuana use, and my mom ended up catching on to me. She ended up reaching out to the school. The school was trying to help me, couldn't really come to a conclusion of what to do with me, and she, at her kind of wit's end, reminder, I'm the oldest child, so I was kind of the guinea pig. This was the first time she was dealing with anything, so she didn't know what to do, so she ended up calling the police.
It's also a very unique situation.
Yes.
It's not like bad grades at school. It's
exactly
potentially life-threatening situation.
Life-threatening situations. And she ended up calling the police department, and the police ended up coming to my house, and she really explained to them, listen, it's my first son. I'm a single parent. He's drinking in school. He's smoking weed. I don't know what to do. And the police ended up putting me on a CHINS, which is a child in need of services. And pretty quickly, the juvenile district court got involved in my life and began to monitor me for drugs and alcohol in school, was failing drug tests for smoking weed and drinking. So at 14 years old, I got sent to my first rehab, which was in Danvers. It was a youth prevention rehab, I think it was, but it was for 120 days. And that was my first time I went to rehab. And then I went again at 16, 17. And then when I became fully addicted to opiates, I've probably been to detox about 50 plus times.
Really?
Yeah. And then the rehab centers, I would go to different places, different states. I've been to Florida twice. I've been to Maine, everywhere in Massachusetts for the most part. And nothing out of all those times ever seemed to work for me. And for a while, I thought I had some type of mental disability that was undiagnosed that people didn't know about. Maybe it was new, because why do I keep leaving and doing these things again that I know are hurting me and ruining my life? Mm-hmm. And so I thought truly there was something mentally wrong with me that nobody would be able to diagnose or help. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I got to a breaking point and ended up changing my life. But countless stints in rehab before I was able to get my life on the right path.
And similar to with you, Hunter?
Yeah, I'd love to give some context just in terms of like how I got to the point where I was addicted to opiates as well. So it was basically like my junior year. I believe it was like the first or second weekend of my junior year, and it was a slow Saturday night, and I was getting ready to go home. One of my friends called me, who was an upperclassman. I think he had actually graduated the year prior, and he was like, "Hey, slow Saturday night. Like, I want to do something though. Like, I'm gonna go pick up an OxyContin. Like, do you want to split a pill?" And I immediately was just like, yeah, sure, I'm down. Like,
you had never done it before?
Never done it before at this point. But
did you know that Cameron was using at that point?
So he actually wasn't at this point.
Okay.
So I actually was the one that got him into opiates. Oddly enough, he got me into weed and alcohol, and I got him into the opiates.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's odd. But there was a lot of hype and just information like floating through the rumor mill in Lexington at this point about this drug that was going around town, OxyContin. So I had heard a lot about it, but the weed and alcohol up to this point was doing enough for me where I hadn't really gone and I hadn't seeked out OxyContin on my own, but the opportunity was presented to me. And again, I didn't think twice about it. I was like, sure, I'll try it.
So this is just by way of context, this is probably 15 or so years ago, 15, maybe even
probably like
16,
probably like 15, 16 years ago.
So we weren't really fully aware at that point, 15 years ago, of the negative adverse effects of OxyContin.
The information had started to come out, right? Because OxyContin got commercialized in, I believe, 1996. It was the mid 90s. And by like 99, 2000, there had started to be a lot of cases reported about people overdosing, the issues with addiction to the drug. So the information had started to come out, but it was kind of during this period that I'm talking about, I would say like 2007, 2008 to 2012 is when it was kind of the height of the prescription pill epidemic in the United States. But so my friend came and picked me up. We went and split a pill. I snorted it. And much like my experience with weed that first time, I didn't fall in love with it. It made me sick. Some people will tell you that, like they'll have kind of an adverse reaction. It'll make them sick. Their stomach will hurt. I actually threw up. And again, kind of found myself sitting there asking myself, what's all the hype about? Like, why do people, I feel sick. I threw up. That's not fun. Like, why aren't people just sticking to weed? And then it was a couple months from that first time that I used it, I was buying weed from the guy that was selling me weed at the time. And he goes, Hunter, I'm selling this other stuff now too. I know I sell you weed, but I have these pills. And I was like, you know what? I tried those a couple months ago. I didn't like it, but sure, I'll try it again. The second time I did it, very similar to the story I told about weed, I fell in love with it. Like the euphoria was weed times a million is how I describe it. Like the feelings of anxiety and self-esteem that I was struggling with, just it alleviated all those emotions and those feelings.
And no adverse effects like you have at the first time.
No. And the next day I woke up, the second I woke up, the first thing on my mind was OxyContin. So I went and got a pill that very next day. And then the next day I got another. Midway through my junior year, I was 16 years old, fully addicted to OxyContin. It was pretty much by the middle to end of my junior year, I had started experiencing like withdrawal symptoms, and I knew at that point that I had gotten myself into some pretty serious stuff, and it was a problem. And our mom, just to be transparent, our mom's been sober for like 40 years. So I was going to AA. We were both going to AA meetings with her as young children. So I felt like she did a really good job educating my brother and I from a young age about the history of our family related to substance abuse. And she basically was like,
and the harmfulness,
yes. Right? Like it runs in our family. And that's a common story. A lot of people like that have issues with drugs and alcohol, it runs in their family. Not all, right? There are people that they may be the first person in their family to actually go through something like this. But I thought she did an amazing job just educating, my brother and I about it growing up. So I kind of knew once I got to that point, like, okay, this is what my mom's been talking about. Like, my life is starting to crumble and fall apart like very, very quickly. By the end of my junior year, I wasn't able to get up and get to school on time. I started lying a lot. I started stealing. I started committing crimes in the community. Once I was addicted to Oxycontin, the downward spiral was fast. Yeah. And so in terms of rehab, it was, I had failed out of school my senior year. I came back for a second senior year. I failed out again. And at this point, I had caught a pretty serious charge. I was facing some legitimate prison time. And so I approached my family at this point. It was sort of like that proverbial rock bottom. I was like, wow, my freedom is at risk now. I approached my family and I was like, this is out of control. I obviously am not able to fix this on my own. Like, I need to get help. So I went to a 45-day treatment program at McLean Hospital here in Massachusetts, in Belmont, Mass. It's one of, if not the most renowned rehabilitation hospitals in the world.
Right.
I completed that program, but the mindset that I went in with was opiates are the problem, right? I just want to stop using opiates, but when I get out, I still want to use marijuana. I still want to drink. I still want to snort cocaine casually. Opiates are the problem. That's what's causing my life to fall apart.
And did you see them as the problem because of the theft that you were engaged in? Like, it was less to do with the substance and more to do with the crime?
I didn't feel like I was fully addicted to anything other than opiates. So like, as long as I didn't get fully addicted to a drug, then I wouldn't have to go out and commit all these crimes to support my addiction. And I knew at that point, like, or at least this is what I told myself, these other drugs, these quote unquote party drugs, you're less likely to get addicted to them. So the opiates, I felt like I'm at such high risk to get addicted to these, and then I'll start committing crimes, I'll start stealing, I'll start lying again. So I need to stay away from the opiates, but the less addictive drugs, or what I perceive to be less addictive, I still want to use those because those won't cause my life to fall apart. And it was about 8 years between the first and the second time that I had to go to rehab. And I was able to accomplish some things in that 8 years, but I was still, using drugs with great regularity. Just, I felt like I was using, or my goal was to use them enough to the point where I was having fun, but not too much to the point where I would get addicted and have to go to rehab again. Obviously that didn't work out.
This is where your paths are divergent a little bit. So you go to rehab.
Yeah.
You get your addiction under control in your own mind.
Yeah.
You, on the other hand, are in rehab. You're going through treatment. You're going through detox multiple times. So at the same time, you're both using, you're going down different paths.
Yeah.
So what was your aha moment? And did those happen at the same point in time? What was your aha moment when you realized this is it, I need to get sober, and you were able to accomplish that?
For all substances, drugs, alcohol, marijuana from 13 to 27. And then it was from 17 to 27, that a decade that was dominated by Oxycontin, heroin, cocaine use, which evolved into smoking crack. And my life snowballed into just pandemonium. My aha moment was at the end of my using, where I was totally removed from my friends and family. Nobody wanted to be around me or hang out with me. I was truly a liability to be around. You didn't know if you invited me over to your house if I was going to overdose and die in your bathroom. You didn't know.
Or steal something.
Or if the police were looking for me and they were going to come in through your front door and find me. You truly just didn't know what to expect with me. I was just that big of a liability. And towards the end of my using, I had about 6 or 7 warrants for my arrest at this time. I was on the run from the courts, and I was by myself in a Motel 6 in Nashua, New Hampshire. And in this bedroom, I had some money, I had drugs, that's all I really thought I needed to be happy and okay. So I didn't mind that nobody wanted to be near me or hang out with me or call me. Didn't bother me at all. And one morning I woke up and did what I normally would do, and that's lean over, do some drugs, whether it was heroin or doing some cocaine or eating some Xanax, whatever it was. And I remember one morning I did what I normally did, and all of a sudden the drugs didn't work. Mind you, nonstop I was doing drugs and alcohol because it removed me from myself. And I felt better about myself. I didn't hate myself as much when I would do these substances. And I remember this one morning where that didn't happen. You know, so I do some heroin and I still feel anxious. I still don't like myself. Now I'm bothered that I'm alone. And nobody wanted to be around me or talk to me.
Just such a high tolerance. Like once you build a tolerance, eventually the drugs, they stop working.
Right.
And I kind of came to this conclusion where I said to myself, well, if the drugs aren't working anymore and I have to deal with these emotions and deal with my self-image problems, well, I don't want to be here anymore. And I made a conscious decision to take my own life that day. And so I ended up taking about 5 or 6 grams of some fentanyl-laced heroin that I had. And at this time, I wasn't injecting drugs. I never used a needle. I would sniff or smoke them. And I knew it was too much for me to put in my body at one time. So I ended up mixing those drugs into a water bottle, put them on the countertop in front of the bed in this hotel. I called a drug dealer who I've bought Xanax from probably well over 100 times. And I called him and I said, I need 10 Xanax bars dropped off to me. And he agreed and came and dropped them off to me at my hotel. And I went back in my hotel room and I sat on the bed and I said a quick prayer. I don't really recall what it was exactly. It was more or less just, I hope nobody's sad. I hope nobody thinks this is their fault. You know, this is my problem. I did this to myself. I don't want anybody to feel bad about it. And so I took the 10 Xanax bars, I swallowed them with the fentanyl-laced water bottle, and my plan was to just fall asleep and not wake up. And so I laid on my bed, I closed my eyes, fell asleep. Of course, that didn't work. I'm here with you today. I woke up, I don't even know, 3 or 4 hours later, and I woke up in this hotel room. And at first I thought I was in hell because I tried to take my own life, and that you know, for eternity, I'm banished to be stuck in this hotel room this is what was running through my brain when I first opened my eyes again, that I'm stuck in this hotel room for eternity and I'll be having to try to kill myself every single day and it's just not going to work. I thought that was my punishment.
Wow.
And it took about 10 minutes for me to realize I actually was alive. And I went over to my cell phone. I had a text message from the drug dealer that I bought Xanax from probably 100 times, and his text message, it said, hey man, I don't know how this happened, but yours got mixed up somehow. Those were fake that I sold you. Can I come by and give you your money back?
No kidding.
Or can I come give you some real ones or come give you your money back? And I still get goosebumps when I talk about it. And I broke down crying. It was just too much for me to handle what I was reading, what I just went through, what I planned to do. And then after that, I called my mom and I told her, I need you to bring me someplace. Like, I have to go. And at this point, she was very estranged from me. And she was just so used to me calling, asking for money or manipulating her for something or someplace I needed to go. And she agreed to come pick me up. And she said, when I pick you up, I don't want you to talk to me. I don't want you to ask me any questions. Don't ask me for money. I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to bring you to where you need to go, and then just get out. She ended up bringing me to Spectrum in Weymouth. Sure enough, she dropped me off. I didn't say a word to her. I walked in there, and that started my path towards sobriety. And I'm going on 7 years now, and haven't had a mind-altering substance touch my body since that day.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, talk about divine intervention.
Crazy.
To keep you here and to get you back on the right path.
I always tell people, I mean, you can call it whatever you want. Divine intervention, luck, whatever you want. I don't know what those odds would be, but I can tell you they're extremely slim.
Right.
Yeah. And for those that may not know, the combination of benzos or Xanax, like he was talking about, and opiates is deadly, right? So if those pills, the Xanax, were real, he wouldn't be here today,
Right.
You know, because that is a deadly combination, especially in the dosages that he was using them in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, what was your moment where you realized you had to get clean?
Again, I always had lofty goals and aspirations for myself from a young age, and I kind of knew even from 16, 17. I wasn't as aware as I was once I was like, you know, in my 20s, but I was like, if I want to reach these goals and aspirations I have in my mind, I probably eventually will have to get sober, especially. And I think a big part of that was the education that my mom provided growing up. Like she would always say, like, it was ingrained in my mind, like, people in our family are not successful if they use drugs and alcohol.
And did you witness that in your brother? Was that influential at all in your life?
Yeah.
In Cameron's journey?
Yeah, maybe like, I think both of us eventually, it's, you know, like, cause he's had goals and aspirations for himself as well. And eventually, you know, we both knew that in order for us to reach those goals and aspirations, we would have to stop using drugs and alcohol, but it's not as easy as just saying, hey, I want to stop. If it was that easy, then we wouldn't have had to go to rehab.
Right.
Right. Like once addiction sinks its hooks into you, it's really, really difficult to pull away from it.
It's
right?
an obsession.
It's also a big
of the mind.
blame game. Like, you know, this was everybody else's fault but my own.
Yeah.
This was
interesting.
The school's fault. This was my mom's fault. This was my brother's fault. This was the police's fault. It was everybody else's fault but my own.
Yeah.
And that's just, you know, the sickness of addiction in your head.
Do you mean the addiction itself or the consequences of addiction were other people's fault?
I would say both.
Or both?
Yeah.
Both. It was just anything to not point the finger at myself is what I would do.
You have such an irrational way of thinking when you're addicted to drugs. You are truly not acting as yourself. Like you are not yourself when you're addicted to any substances. But for me, after that first time I went to rehab when I was 18, again, when I got out, I was able to accomplish some things in that 8-year period between the first and the second time I had to go to rehab. I went to Middlesex Community College. I got my associate's degree. I went off to UMass Amherst, and I graduated from UMass Amherst with high honors with my bachelor's degree. But again, this whole time I was so miserable, right? Because I had untreated substance use disorder, right? I was just, as I mentioned earlier, I was using drugs enough to the point where I felt like I was having fun, but not to the point where I was fully physically addicted, where I couldn't prioritize certain things like school and like trying to hold a job. Like I was able to hold it together somewhat, but still just so miserable. It was spring break of my senior year. I was getting ready to graduate, and I had just
college?
College, yeah. Yeah, it was March of 2019, and I was, again, just so miserable. I kind of had like a breaking point. And I was like, you know what? I want to go back to opiates. I want to use opiates again. I called my brother. I said, literally, I want to use heroin.
This is after how many years of not using?
It was like 8 years of no opiates. Yeah. And, he was like, what do you mean? Like you haven't used them for so long. Like this is out of nowhere. I was like, who are you to question me? Like, I'm coming to pick you up, and I want to go get a bag of heroin, and I want to get high. That's exactly what we did. I drove back from UMass Amherst, 2 hours. I came, picked him up. We went and picked up a bag of heroin. And this was in 2018, as I mentioned, and fentanyl had become a serious problem on the street at this point, right? Like it was very prevalent on the street. A lot of heroin was laced with fentanyl. A lot of prescription pills were laced with fentanyl. So I knew that this bag it was a very high likelihood that it was laced with fentanyl. And I didn't have a tolerance. So I said, I want you to take the driver's seat because I want to sniff a line right now, and I want you to start driving to CVS because I want you to go inside and get a can of Narcan just in case I overdose. That's what we did. We parked, he walked inside, got the Narcan. By the time he walked out, I was overdosing in a passenger seat. He hit me with Narcan. It didn't revive me. Wow. So he had to call first responders. or call 911. They came, they hit me with a second bottle of Narcan. I didn't wake up again. So they had to stick a tube down my throat and like give me a third can of Narcan, and that revived me. So that was obviously an eye opener. I was right on the brink of death. I mean, I was knocking on death's doorstep.
Yep.
And that was sort of like it was a pivotal moment in my life. Mm-hmm. And then it was, once I graduated, I actually had lost my job, and I had to move out of the apartment I was living in. I had to move back home with my mom, and things had really started to spiral at this point. Like I was just in a bad place. Like my depression was really bad. Like I started to like kind of give up on life again. This was like the progression of like, I thought I could hold it together and just use party drugs, and eventually it led me back to opiates.
Mm-hmm. So did you continue using opiates after that scary experience?
Yeah, not like every day, but I was using them, every few weeks. And, he had already gotten sober at this point, and he was like, hey, I'm going to get a 2-bedroom apartment. You can move in with me, but you can't use drugs. I lied, of course. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, of course I can stop using drugs. Like I had to move back home with my mom at this point. I really wanted to move out. So I would say anything to just allow him to move, let me move in with him. And it was like the second day he caught me high. And then within the first 6 months, he caught me high like 6 or 7 times. And then the last time he caught me, he came home and I was face down flat on our hardwood floor with like pills like flung out around me. He thought he had just walked in on me dead, like overdosed and dead. That he thought I had overdosed and died. We got in a fist fight. I woke up the next day. I didn't really know what happened. And he was like, you need to go get treatment, Hunter. Like this is bad. You're taking pills. You're driving your car around blacked out. You're going to crash and kill someone, kill yourself. Like this is bad. Mm-hmm. And I had, again, at that point kind of reached like what people describe as like, it was my proverbial rock bottom again, right? Like, yeah, this is bad. It's out of control. Like, I'm not going to be able to fix myself. I need help. And so that was in May of 2020. That was the second time that I had to go into rehab. I went into another 45-day treatment program in Western Mass here at Spring Hill Recovery. And I went in with the right mindset this time. I really wanted to stop. I wanted to stop everything. I had kind of had that like, okay, if like clearly it wasn't just opiates that was the problem, right? Like I can't use any drugs, any mind-altering substances, because eventually it's going to progress and get me to the point where like it's completely out of control and my life's unmanageable. Mm-hmm. Now, after that second time I went in, I came out and I was able to stay sober for like 10 months, but it was about like 6 months after I gotten out, I kind of deprioritized my sobriety. I wasn't focused on it as much. I was more interested in going out with my friends, and I had a surgery coming up, and I was actually looking forward to the surgery because I knew that surgery means pain, and pain means I can manipulate my doctors into giving me prescription pain pills. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened. And that it was like 12 hours after that surgery I got on my neck because I had a weightlifting accident. I had locked myself in a hotel room at a Holiday Inn, and I had just a medley of drugs. And again, I was very lucky to not die in that hotel room. I had no tolerance. Again, I was basically 10 months sober up to this point, and he was still sober, and he found out the hotel I was at. He had the cops come and do a wellness check on me. I don't even remember them coming. And he came and showed up at the hotel. He was like, do I even need to say it, right? Like, this is bad, Hunter. Like, you need to go to treatment again.
It wasn't good.
Again, it was like, it was the third time where I had sort of just succumbed to the reality of the situation. Like, yeah, like, I don't think there's any question that this is really bad. Like, right. I need to go get treatment again. That was in March of 2021. That was the third time that I went to treatment, and that was the last time that I went. And I've had 4 years of continuous sobriety since then.
That's incredible. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you
so you both
much.
had some pretty dramatic experiences to bring you to where you are today.
Yeah, definitely. And some of them are more insidious than others. I mean, when Hunter just spoke right now, saying that I'm going to try this drug, but make sure you bring me to this place so I don't die, is just such a perfect example of the brain chemistry of somebody struggling with substance use disorder.
Yeah.
You know, I equate that to if you had an allergy to shellfish and you're at a restaurant and you're like, I'm going to eat a bunch of these oysters.
Yeah.
Drive me to the hospital so I don't die after.
Right.
You know, somebody that's
Make sure
sitting
you
with
have
you.
a couple of EpiPens.
Yeah,
in
somebody
your
that's
bag.
sitting with
Right.
you would say, that's crazy.
Exactly.
Why would you do that?
The insanity.
You know, it's just completely insane. And
Right.
you equate that same situation to, you know, using drugs or alcohol. And it's like, if I do this, I'm probably going to die, but I'm still going to do it anyways. It's just completely insane.
Right.
Yeah. To take it even a step further, like when I overdosed that time and I had to get checked into because when they come and they revive you, they're like, all right, we have to bring you to the hospital. So I went to Lowell General. When I got out, I went and I finished the same bag of fentanyl and heroin that had just put me in the hospital. Just because when you're that caught up in active addiction, there is nothing really that you care about other than getting high, right? Like you'll risk your life, you'll risk your freedom, your relationships, your family. Like there's nothing really that will stop you from getting high.
So we talk a lot about the teenage brain and the importance of understanding how the teenage brain develops, and that it's not fully developed until the age of 25, 26, 27. They kind of keep changing, moving the goalpost.
Right.
Do you think that your brain development had anything to do with your lack of inhibition and then your ability to come to some sort of realization about the dire condition that you were in later on in life?
Yeah, I definitely would agree that drug and alcohol use from a very young age, I would say it stunted a lot of my mental growth. I was more or less stuck in an area in time where I was 15, 16 years old, all the way up until I was 27, mentally, you know, stuck in that time frame mentally. And I would say it wasn't until, you know, I attempted to take my own life and get fully sober that I began to acknowledge how stunted I was. And it was almost like learning to walk again at 27 years old. I didn't know how the world actually worked at all.
Right.
And I had to begin like I was 13 again and figure out how everything works correctly and how to be an adult and how to manage myself and how to manage my life. And, you know, I would say definitely drugs and alcohol stunted me mentally for sure.
Yeah. And I think like what your question was is like when you're that young, you just don't understand like the potential like long-term consequences of the decisions that you're making. Like when I smoked weed in 8th grade for the first time, I'm 13. I didn't have the foresight or the understanding of the significance of that decision I was making.
Biologically, you didn't have that ability.
Exactly. Like your brain just is not developed enough to understand the impact and the significance of this decision that you're making, right? Nor should someone that's 13 be expected to understand that.
And a lot of times you're living with your parents. So it's like there's no real, you know, like as an adult, if you become addicted to a drug and you can't make it to work, you can't pay your bills, you won't have a home, you won't have a vehicle.
Right.
But when you're that young, there's no like real detrimental consequences to trying these most of the time.
A big part of my decision to get, I don't want to say a big part, but certainly something that played a role in the decision that I made when I was 27 to get sober was just like the level of maturity that you have at 27. Not to say I was fully matured. I think still to this day, I'm obviously still learning. I'm 31, but at 27, like you have more accountability. You have a greater understanding of life and what life requires, right? The stakes are much higher. Like you should be, you know, if not already, moving towards financial independence. So like there's just a lot more at stake when you're in your mid to late 20s relative to like 13 years old. You just, you know, you've come across a lot more people in your life at that point. You just have a greater understanding of like, this is really bad. Right. When you're 13, it almost just like,
You're invincible.
Yeah, you don't have any like major consequences to your behavior and to your actions. Like you could, right? Like something could go drastically wrong, but I felt like when I was 13 and even 16, like I kind of knew like, yeah, this is not normal behavior, but like I'm still able to play baseball, you know, when I'm 13, I'm still able to get up and go to school, you know, and then when you're 27 and you're not able to get up to go to work, you're spending all your money, you have no money in the bank. People are looking at you as some type of liability. Like these start to really resonate with you because you understand like more that this is not normal, right?
Well, and going back to what you said earlier about comparing yourself to your peers, you knew, Cameron, you said that you knew that you used substances differently than your peers did.
At a very young age,
as an
yes.
adult,
Yeah.
you get to a point where you're like, wait a minute, how come I have no money in the bank, but I'm seeing my friends succeed?
Right.
I would imagine that's an element to it as well.
Absolutely. Totally.
Are there any long-term health consequences to your substance use? You both seem very fit, very healthy outwardly, but are there any struggles that you have physically as a result?
So it's actually funny you bring that up. I constantly am pretty positive that there has just been long-term issues with my body from prolonged use of fentanyl, acetaminophen, all these different types of drugs. Just like what they did to my digestive gut or my joints. Also sometimes I would say even mentally as well. Sometimes I just have these like brain fogs and I'm like, did I really cause that much damage? But I would definitely say yes. Nothing diagnosed 100%.
Yeah.
But when I got off the drugs, my gut was never the same. My joints, like my knees, my elbows and stuff, were never the same. But also I'm using painkillers where like if something was wrong, I wouldn't even have been able to tell.
You don't even know.
Right.
I'd have no
That's a good
idea.
point.
So I don't know. Maybe it was something that I've had for my whole life, but I would definitely say, yeah, there's some issues.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't have any evidence to say like, yes, absolutely. But I think my memory has probably been affected. I think, like Cameron said, my joints potentially. Once you first get off drugs, especially when you were using them as heavily as Cameron and I were, you'll notice some things like in the first month or two that are like drastically different than, comparing yourself to what you were 2 months ago. Like you start laughing a lot more.
Oh.
Yeah. Like because your emotions and your feelings are so suppressed when you're addicted to drugs, like you're almost like robotic, but you'll start laughing a lot more. Your sleep will be much better. You'll be, more motivated. Like all these things start to like change naturally. And like the first like couple months, you're like, oh wow, like I feel all these different emotions now, like that I didn't feel for so long. And another one I'll mention is the drug dreams, right? Like when you, even to this day, I haven't used drugs in 4 years. Like once in a while I'll have drug dreams where I like literally go pick up drugs, use drugs. When you first get sober, like the first 6 months, you might have drug dreams like every single night for
Imagining yourself buying,
literally
using,
going, buying it, using it. Like it's
more like a memory than a dream. Almost.
It's crazy.
I mean, the first year of sobriety is very, very strange. Like my brother just said, a lot of emotions come back because you're numbing yourself for so long.
Right.
Negative emotions, positive. When I first got sober, I remember there would be times where I would just like break out crying, like just bawling out from just watching a TV show or something. Nothing that was even really crazy, but I would just start breaking down, like bawling, crying, for no real reason at all. And then it would just go away. Yeah. And I was so used to not having to feel any type of emotions at all that even something so small as like seeing a puppy on a commercial would just make me just start bawling, crying. And feeling those emotions and dealing with stuff for your first year of sobriety, it's a big deal. And you definitely should have somebody to lean on that understands what you're going through, like a sponsor. Or luckily for me, I was in a sober living facility. So when I was going through all these things and I thought I was being crazy, I would talk to other people like me and they'd say, no, it's all right, man.
Common experience.
I broke down crying many times. Don't worry about it. And then there's the drug dreams as well. I remember one time I had one at my sober living facility and it was so real. When I woke up, I went to my house manager and I told him I think I got high.
Wow.
Yeah, it was that
they are
real.
So it's like lucid dreams.
Yeah, and he was like,
it's
I don't.
crazy.
He was like, I don't think you did. I was like, listen, man, you got to drug test me. You got to check because I'm telling you,
no kidding.
I definitely. Oh, it was so vivid, and he He did it, and he drug tested me. He goes, "No, you passed." And I was like, "I'm sorry, Sean.
It was just a drug dream, man."
Yeah, he was like,
You're
I was like,
right.
"I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
He's like,
I've
"Yep."
never heard of that phenomenon before.
Yeah, it's crazy.
When you said drug dreams, I thought you meant the way that you dream when you're under the influence versus the way that you
No.
dream when you're sober.
Yeah,
Or
when you're
dreaming
sweet.
about picking
Yeah.
them up and using them again, and it's so terrifying because you'll feel it in this dream. It's that vivid and real.
Yeah.
Where you wake up sweating or panicking or go and tell on yourself because you think you did drugs.
I think to touch on your question about like long-term consequences, I think you'll probably start to see a lot more information specifically related to substance use disorder and its long-term effects on like your brain, your body coming out. Like, I mean, even it was like last year, maybe 2 years ago, he participated in a study when he went in and they took a scan of his brain.
Yeah, they do that.
Because it is like substance use disorder. It wasn't even really called that for, I think, until like relatively recently.
Right.
Like it was just kind of labeled substance use disorder. For the longest time, it was like alcoholism or drug addiction. That's what it was called.
Substance abuse
Substance
is the term that
abuse.
we used to
Substance
use.
abuse.
Yeah. And so it's still a relatively new and like newly studied disease. Like even thinking back to, 15 years ago when we were like really in the thick of our addiction, we didn't have the resources available, like coalitions, like Hingham Cares and stuff like that. That wasn't really around. It was kind of just like the DARE program. There was some pamphlets that were getting passed around. So there's a lot more like awareness, acceptance. And I think the scientific community studying substance use disorder now to the point where like you'll start to see more and more information coming out about it, both like short-term and long-term consequences, probably forever from now on.
The education as well is so big because when I first tried OxyContin, I had no idea. It's from a doctor. It's
Right.
prescribed.
Right.
It's safe. That's what I thought. It's not like, quote unquote, from some guy under a bridge or whatever.
Right.
You would think, I was like, this is from a doctor. It's from a pharmacy. It's prescribed. And, I had no real education around like physical dependence, withdrawals, what that could look like. I had no idea. I just thought it came from a doctor and it was totally fine. But, these days you have people like me and my brother where schools will bring in and talk to kids in real life, like this person struggled with this. And when we were growing up, you didn't really have that. Like he said, there wasn't so many coalitions or people that you could reach out to at schools and stuff like that. And I would just say nowadays, it's a lot, I wouldn't say easiest, but it's a lot easier to combat these type of stigmas and problems in the communities than it was when I was growing up.
Just more acceptance, less. I mean, there is still a stigma around it. Like let's be honest, but it's gotten much better.
So we've just been talking about the different types of resources that kids have today and the information that is shared with them about around substance use disorder and prevention. And you also mentioned that your mom was very integral in providing you with information and, cautioning you about going down that same path that she and others in your family had gone down. So based on, I guess, your mom and your own experiences, what advice would you have for parents who want to keep their kids safe around substances?
Don't give up. If it gets to the point where they are struggling with substances, to just not give up. I mean, it took me probably 100 times before I got it right. So there's always going to be that chance where the 101st time it works. It's so tough because you don't want to be an overbearing parent and overlooking their shoulder and being too much to the point where they can't feel like they can bring you their problems or issues, but you don't want to give them enough rope where they can hang themselves at the same time.
Right.
It's such a fine line between the two. And I would just say to be as supportive as you possibly can to them and also educate them as much as possible. Maybe, try not to be overbearing, but just educate them around certain things. So when I go and I speak to some of these students in schools and stuff, I just try to give them information sometimes. I don't say, if you do this will, I just try to give them real life information. And I'll tell them, there's been occasions where I've had to talk to a parent because their child went down to college. And while they were at college, they ended up being at a fraternity party. And there was a kid there saying, hey, I got some Xanax, let's try them. And he wasn't really too knowledgeable about them and decided to try one. Ended up being laced with fentanyl. He overdosed and died in his dorm room. Never previously struggled with any other substances. He drank here and there, smoked weed sometimes, and then ended up trying a Xanax that was laced with fentanyl and dying in his dorm room. And then, having to talk to a parent about that. Where did I go wrong? What did I do? If they're knowledgeable enough about certain substances, maybe that would change them taking it or not.
Meaning if the parents were educated and could share that knowledge with their child, is that what you mean?
Yeah, 100%, especially since the age of fentanyl. It is more important now than ever before to explain to your kids that fentanyl is basically in everything that you can buy now. It's absolutely shocking and insane that, there's no real safe trying to use a substance anymore. There's no real safe experimenting with cocaine or trying these different drugs to see what they're like. You could just try, overdose, and die.
Right.
And we know firsthand experience from families who it's happened to, and I would just say education is your best weapon or your best tool with your kids.
Yeah, I agree. It's tough, because I don't have kids. I want to have kids someday. And knowing what I know and what I've gone through personally, it would be very, very difficult for me to see a child of mine using drugs and alcohol without me being very overbearing because, based on my own experience.
Right.
But at the same time, you don't want to be so overbearing to the point where okay, you can't go hang out with your friend, because being social when you're growing up as an adolescent, it's important to develop social skills because those translate throughout the rest of your life. You have to be able to be around people.
Right.
And that's when those formative years are really important. So I think it's a balance. If you see a child of yours using drugs and alcohol, I think it's about fostering a relationship. At the end of the day, you're their parent, so they're always going to be a bit hesitant to tell you and share things with you fully. But if you can foster a relationship and create some type of environment where hey, unless I think you're at risk of dying, it's not going to be an aha gotcha moment when we talk about this stuff.
Right.
I'm going to let you know that what you're doing is wrong and I don't approve of it, but it's not going to be I'm going to crucify you completely. Right. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about it. I want you to tell me what you're doing. I want to explain to you, I had a friend or, I know different people that started out doing what you're doing, thinking it was never going to turn into what it eventually did, which is full-blown addiction. I think using those real life stories and letting them know hey, the decisions that you're making today can potentially have an effect on the rest of your life.
Yep.
Right. So it really does come down to, as a parent, I think just fostering an environment with your kids to make them feel as comfortable as they can, with a child and a parent relationship, with sharing what they're doing with, whether it's by themselves or with their friends. Also understanding the resources that are available in the community that you live in, right? So Lexington is an example I'll use. When we go there and we speak, they have a team of prevention specialists, dedicated prevention specialists on the staff and the faculty at Lexington, right? And
That's great.
So when I go into these school districts, I really like to understand what resources are available to the students. So when inevitably that question does come up, hey, how can, who can I point people to that I'm concerned about, loved ones, friends that I feel need some help. And I align with the prevention team there. Those conversations remain confidential between the students and the prevention team there, unless they feel the student is at risk to hurt themselves or kill themselves. Mm-hmm. And they will recommend, hey, we should tell your parents, but that is up to you, right? If you say, I don't want to tell my parents, this is a confidential conversation. Like, we won't tell them unless, again, like, we're concerned that something bad's going to happen. So I think having, like, letting the students know that they have resources, adults available to them that they can go talk to without because the big concern for the students is, I don't want my parents to find out.
Right.
I don't want my parents to know. Right. So if you can have like a group of adults or a dedicated adult, whatever it may be, where they know that they can go and express like, hey, like, I'm concerned about this person. I'm concerned about myself. I don't want it to get back to my parents. Like, that's huge. Like, that's really important.
Right. Bringing
it up on a regular basis, especially if you see them exhibiting behavior that's concerning, and then making sure that the students know of the resources available to them in the community. And that it's never going to be like a we got you moment. Like, we're going to arrest you now because we know what you're doing, or we're going to crucify you because we know what you're doing.
Right.
That will never work, because if that is what people think is, or what these kids think is going to happen when they come forward with how they're feeling or someone that they're concerned about, they just never will.
Right.
Right. So you really want to let them know, like, hey, we are actually, like, we're here working in your best interests. Like, we don't want to see these things happen to you, right? We really are genuinely here to help you.
Really great answers. And a nice segue into my next question, which is, do you have any tips for young people on how they can make safe and healthy choices around substances? So providing them with resources, confidentiality, opportunities to communicate, are some things that you just mentioned. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you would say specifically to young people?
So I would say, so one of the main things, like, I try to reflect on when I was in high school, right? You know, teachers are the enemy, parents are the enemy, you know, I don't want to listen to anything they have to say. But when you bring somebody else in to talk to them that's not, you know, not a teacher, not a parent, they tend to listen more and take it in more. And it's so strange, like, when we go in and I talk to these kids, they like come up to me with a bunch of questions after, and the teacher's like, how do you do that? And I'm like, it's very simple. It's just, I'm not you.
Right.
I'm not you. I'm not a parent, you know.
We don't make the rules.
Yeah, we don't.
Right.
Yeah, you know. So it's a lot easier when you are able to bring, and I'm not even just saying like us, like, you know, I do know, I'm sure there's some programs out there where, you know, when I was growing up, there was the Big Brother program. I was a part of that when I was a kid, and I was going through some stuff, and I thought that was the coolest program ever. I thought it was really awesome. And it's just stuff like that, like when some third party person, whether it's a rehab or education or some type of thing, to come and talk to these kids, I think that is more impactful, and they seem to listen more.
Well, it's the difference between hearing facts and science and instruction to actually hearing something very personal.
Yeah.
And the personal piece resonates with kids.
Yeah, but it doesn't even just need to be substance abuse. It's like a scientist could come in, or, you know, somebody that works for NASA and talk about space or whatever, and I'm like, oh. But then they're like, this meteorite fell from the sky, and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
What?
The firsthand lived experience, it is the most impactful. And the work that I think teachers are some of the most important people in our 100%. World, honestly. But it's just, I think back to, you know, when I was a student in high school, right? Like, when I went into health class, like, part of the curriculum was education on drugs and alcohol, but it was more like, hey, here's a whiteboard, here's the drug, here's what it does, here's the effect it has, like, this is like what it can this is what can happen to you if you use these drugs. I'm just like, this is just basic curriculum. Like, I want to hear someone's firsthand, you know, story, their experience.
Right. Prove it to me.
Yeah,
Prove it that's what happens.
Yeah, because
it's like, hey, I overdosed in a car.
Yeah.
Like, this is real, right? This is not just like, you know, we're not fear mongering here. Like, this was my life.
Right.
You know, I lived this my whole life. But in terms of, to answer your question about like how they can say no, or like things that they can do to,
like, if they find themselves in an environment,
so what,
a party environment or something.
Like, just in terms, so like, I want to answer it kind of in two ways, right? So as someone that has diagnosed substance use disorder, I inherently have this void in me that has to be filled, right? And for the longest time, that void was filled with drugs and alcohol. And then once that was removed, I had to figure out ways to fill that void, right? And for me, exercise, diet. I love using the sauna. I like doing the cold plunge. I like traveling. I like going out and trying new restaurants, trying different foods, going snowboarding. So you figure out ways to fill that void that was previously filled with drugs and alcohol. But you don't have to let it get to that point where, you burn your life to the ground. Now I'm going to go figure out all these different healthy habits and hobbies to help me stay off drugs and alcohol. If you start from a young age finding things that you enjoy doing, things that you're passionate about, constructive things in your life, it's going to significantly decrease the potential for you to get addicted to drugs and alcohol, because you have these things that are very fulfilling in your life already.
Right.
It's when you don't have anything that's fulfilling, you don't have anything you feel really passionate about, no healthy hobbies. As a human, you're going to look for something to kind of give you that dopamine release that, you could be getting from these healthy, constructive hobbies. So that's one thing. I'll really encourage young people, find things as young as you can that you enjoy doing, whether it's athletics, music, theater, travel, whatever it is, snowboarding, whatever it may be. Try to find things that you really enjoy doing, because it's going to drastically decrease your chances of getting, finding drugs and alcohol and getting addicted to them. And then second, when you're in a situation inevitably where you're at, a social gathering, you're at a party, you're in college, and drugs and alcohol are presented to you, I really, really encourage you to think about, whether you think about my story, Cameron's story, the conversations you have with your faculty, your parent, whatever it may be, think about the long-term consequences and potential ramifications of picking up drugs or alcohol. I don't know if zero sum is the correct term, but there are consequences for using drugs and alcohol. It's a fact. You're never going to be the best version of yourself when you're using drugs and alcohol. So I really encourage you to think about it from that perspective. And then in terms of actually how to say no, obviously I have a much more straightforward reason that I can lean on when, if at this point in my life, it doesn't really happen, but if I'm offered drugs and alcohol, I can just say, hey, I have a history of substance use. I don't use drugs. I don't drink. One thing I always say is you can tell people that you like being clear-minded, or, I have a game tomorrow. I have to get up early, or, I'm not into drugs and alcohol. And most of the time you'll realize, especially now, as I said, the awareness and the stigma is becoming less and less. People are understanding. Rarely are you going to find, if someone's hey, try this, have a drink. You're no, I'm not really interested. A lot of the time people will just kind of say, oh, okay. Right. If you get someone that's really pushy, one, that's probably not someone that you want to spend much time with.
Good point.
And two, don't be afraid to just get to the point hey, I don't want it. Mm-hmm. I don't want it. Stop asking me.
You can push back as much as they're
push back.
pressuring you.
One of the clinicians when I was in rehab, he was I ran into this situation where this guy was on me. He was I'm an alcoholic. I can't drink. And the guy was oh, okay. He felt kind of stupid, because why in the first place are you pushing drugs and alcohol on anyone? It's it's not your place. If they want to do it, I'm sure they would be doing it.
Right.
Right. So most of the time you tell someone no one time for one reason or another, they'll leave it alone.
A few years ago, you started an organization called The Sober Truth, and you've been speaking to students in schools.
Yeah.
And we're excited to have you come to Hingham High School in March for Hingham Cares Day.
We're excited.
Hunter, you're going to be speaking to the freshman class. Cameron, you're going to be speaking to the juniors.
Correct.
What prompted your decision to start this business? It's a big deal to make yourself this vulnerable in front of teenagers.
Yeah. I never would have thought that I would be doing this, to be honest with you. The way it started, actually, I was at my local gym, and there was a police officer there from Lexington who used to chase my brother and I, legitimately chased, showed up at our house one time and chased him. And, we just started talking. I was telling him about where I'm at in life now. He was, I'm so proud of you. And I was like, Mitch, if you ever have, students that you feel are high risk in Lexington, or families, any individuals that you think would benefit from speaking to my brother and I, hearing our story, just using us as a resource in one way or the other, like, I would love to do that. I'd love to give back to the community that I feel like I terrorized for so long. Mm-hmm. He was like, you know what? Let me put you in touch with one of the clinicians at the high school, Julie Fenn. She sort of organizes all these different events for the students there. So we came in, I believe the first event we did, I forget what the event was called, but they set up like a mock bedroom for an adolescent, where like
hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, like where they're going to be hiding drugs, like things that you can look for as a parent. And then after they do like a presentation, and Karen and I spoke, it was sort of a mix of students, faculty. I believe the superintendent was there, and it went really well. And they were like, hey, we want to have you come back and speak to the 11th grade. So we came back a couple months later. We spoke to the entire 11th grade in the field house there in Lexington. And they were like, hey, we want to have you come speak to the 9th grade health classes. So then we came back, I believe the beginning of the following school year. We spoke to the 9th grade health classes, and we were like, you know what? This is awesome. Like we love doing this. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that we're more passionate about and like enjoy talking about than substance use disorder, especially telling our own story. And so we started reaching out to, school districts, community leaders. That's how we got in touch with you. Yeah. Throughout Massachusetts, just basically like, hey, this is what we've done so far. Like, we're looking to come into as many school districts in Massachusetts and basically share our lived experience with the youth, the young adults, the different community leaders in your town. Basically, one, raise awareness on the topic of substance use disorder, but two, and more importantly, deter the youth and the young adults here in our communities from making some of the same mistakes that we did as adolescents. So that's really how we've gotten to this point. I never would have, sometimes you hear, you speak to business owners like, oh, it happened organically, like that. I never thought that would have been my story or our story. Right. But the way it happened, obviously, it did end up like that. It was just something that we love doing, that we're passionate about.
Where can people who want to reach out to you and learn more about the Sober Truth, where can they find you? Yeah,
so it's thesobertruth.org. And then on social media, it is _sobertruth. That's the best way to get in touch with us.
On Facebook, Instagram, Twitter?
Not Twitter, not Facebook yet, but those social media mediums will be spun up shortly. Mm-hmm. And then if you want to reach out to me directly, and my email's on the website, and it's on the social media page or on Instagram, but it's hunter@thesobertruth.org.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here today. This has been really tremendous. I'm so excited to have you speak to our students in a few weeks.
We're excited
I think they're going to, glean quite a bit from your stories, and it will have a ripple effect. We've noticed that with our speakers when they come in. It definitely has a ripple effect. A lot of conversations take place after the fact. So
love that.
Yeah, we're so excited. Yeah,
this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. Appreciate this is amazing.
This has been Substance Free 02043. I'm Kristen Arute, and I hope that you will tune in again. For more info or to get involved, go to hinghamcares.org.